Hi, y'all. This week we're talking about Essay 3, challenging our preconceived notions and creating a research question. So let's go. So if you haven't done so already, I will ask you to pause the video right here, head over to Blackboard and read the Essay 3 assignment sheet. Once you have done that, you'll be ready to hear the video. So as you read, the Essay 3 focus is on research and argumentation. So you're going to be selecting a topic, doing some research about it, and crafting an argument about it. Now, most of you, when you read this assignment sheet and started perusing some of the acceptable topics, probably right off the bat may have instantly formed an idea about the argument that you're going to create. But in this video and in your readings for the week from the bad ideas about writing text, I want to challenge you to rethink some of those preconceived ideas you might have about the argument that you're going to create. So a lot of the quotations that I'm about to show you come from the Bad Ideas About Writing textbook, those 2 articles that you read for this week. And you'll notice that I have included citations for all the quotations that I have used. So just as I'm asking you folks to cite your sources, I'm doing that as well. So the first article was titled Research Starts with Answers. And the author, Alice Witt, first starts by giving us a working definition of what she thinks research is. So she calls it a 3-stage process. Step 1 is seeking information that is new to the researcher. Step 2 is interpreting, evaluating, and organizing that information. And step 3 would be reporting that information to others to affect some action. Now, oftentimes, as you read about in this article, writers and researchers start with an answer, right? So instead of starting with a question, we begin with a preconceived notion and then only seek out information that basically confirms that idea. But this author is arguing that a more useful approach to thinking about research is to sort of think of it as a process that begins with a question. So instead of starting your research about whatever topic you're going to write about with the intention of looking for answers, you might instead consider approaching that topic with a viewpoint of looking for problems about it that need solving, or looking for a question about it that needs to be answered. Now, the next article comes from an author whose last name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, but that one was called Research Starts with a Thesis Statement. And you've probably noticed that both of these articles discuss a similar idea. They both challenge the notion that I have highlighted in purple here, that the thesis first or preconceived notion approach to research can actually be harmful, especially when we assume that it is the only way to conduct research, because of course it is not. So this author claims that true, genuine inquiry when it comes to research, the kind that leads to new ideas, often begins with unsettled problems and questions, rather than with something that we have already predetermined and expressed in a thesis statement. So I did grab this quote because I thought it was so great from an engineer in the space program. Someone asked him to describe research, and he responded, "Research is what I'm doing when I don't know what I'm doing." So if you feel like you don't know what you're doing as you start your research, that's okay. This author also goes on to claim that another potential harm of this kind of thesis first model of research is that it emphasizes the false notion that the research process is linear. So just as we have this semester discussed that the writing process is not linear in the way that many of us have a preconceived notion that it is, the research process is also not linear when we use the question or inquiry model of research, okay? So if we do use that thesis-guided research where we pose a question and then we answer the question and we find sources that match up with that answer, we're really not engaging in true research, right? So when we're engaging in deep research, we will often find that it is a messy process. It is a recursive process. You're going to run into bumps. You're going to run into missteps. You're going to run into sources that confuse you or don't agree with you. But we believe that in that process, you will actually be able to come up with a better argument and better information in the end. Clark's College gives a really nice metaphor for the research process. So rather than conceptualizing it as a line from A to Z, they discuss it as a daisy. So just like a daisy's petals, the research process is cyclical and it's also fluid. It can move. So while we're researching, we may find ourselves returning to our question and adjusting or changing it. We might get to the end of our project and discover, wait a minute, we need some better sources and have to go back and sort of, address that issue. So the messiness of research does ask you to be flexible and to modify your approach and perhaps even your beliefs along the way. When we only seek out information that agrees with our viewpoints, we're engaging in something called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is not an effective way to research. We want to challenge ourselves, challenge our ideas, step outside of our belief system, and at least take a look at the other viewpoints before crafting our argument. Finally, this author goes on to tell us, and I love the way that this is written here, that there is value in using research as a tool to engage our curiosity as humans and our sense of wonder as human beings. And in doing so, we have a chance to even improve our lives and the lives of others. So just as the author says here, I want to encourage you during this process as you craft a research question and craft your argument that's related to it, encourage you to embrace uncertainty and to feel comfortable in that messiness and in that unknowing. Now, I've mentioned a few times this idea of a research question, and it's also mentioned in the assignment sheet. So I've included at the end of this slideshow a link to a really great webpage that gives us some tips about how to write this thing called a research question. So let's take a look. So the research question obviously is just sort of what you're centering your research around. Great. And they give us a couple bullet points or guidelines here to help guide our creation of it. So the research question should be clear. It should provide enough specifics that the audience can understand your purpose without needing any additional explanation. Excuse me. And we'll look at an example of that in a moment here. The research question should be focused. In other words, it should be narrow enough that it can be answered quite thoroughly in the space that the writing task gives you. So for example, on the Essay 3 assignment sheet, I give you the example, I think at the end of the sheet, about college sports. Yeah, right here. So for example, writing about college sports would be much too broad, but writing about mandatory pay for college athletes is a better fit for this paper. It is more focused and it is also more specific. In academic writing, generally speaking, we prefer to be concise. So your research question should strive to express what it is expressing in as few words as possible. Of course, a research question needs to be complex. So in other words, we should not be able to answer it with a simple yes or no, because then there probably is not much to research. Instead, we need to be looking for a question that if we want to obtain an answer to it, we're probably going to need to synthesize and analyze ideas from several different places. So you can see it's a little bit more complex than just a yes or no question. Finally, of course, a research question should be arguable. Okay, in other words, it should be debatable. A reasonable person should be able to adopt the viewpoint opposite yours and make a reasonable case. Okay. So if we are, if we create a research question that just states a fact, it doesn't really leave us anywhere to go. So we always want to make sure that our position is a debatable one. The good news is that for Essay 3, especially when using the opposing viewpoints database, I think your topics will lend themselves very well to this kind of arguable position, if that makes sense. Now, of course, we should also ask questions about issues that we care about and are genuinely curious about, because that's going to just create an overall easier and more enjoyable process for you. So here are some steps to help develop a research question. The first would just be to choose, of course, a general topic that interests you. And then you may do some preliminary research on that general topic. Okay, so you might take a peek at some periodicals or some journals. You might sort of dip into the conversation that's happening around your topic. And you might also jot down any questions that occur to you at this point in the process. That might become useful later. Of course, we always want to keep our audience in mind, and I included a lot of information on the assignment sheet about who our audience is and what sort of tone to adopt. Step 4 asks us to start asking questions. And again, notice that so far I have not asked you to adopt a stance on your topic, right? You probably know how you feel about the subject you're making an argument about. But again, I'm challenging you to keep your mind open as you research and start asking those questions. Okay, and they have some examples here that you could read. After you've done that, you're ready to evaluate your question to make sure that it is appropriate or to find out if it might need any refining or revision. So is it clear? Is it focused? Is it complex? One more little bullet point I would add under here is it one of the acceptable topics from the list on the assignment sheet? Because that's important for our particular class. Once you've done all that to create your research question, you're ready to actually begin your research. And we'll be talking about that coming up in the next few weeks. At the bottom here are just a few sample research questions that might be sort of useful as models for you. So the first unclear version asks, how should social networking sites address the harm they cause? Okay, this is a really interesting topic, but I think the second version is more clear, it's more precise, and it's also more complex. So it asks, what action should social networking sites like MySpace and Facebook take to protect users' personal information and privacy? This sounds a little bit outdated now because of the MySpace reference, but you could replace that with any sort of, social media site, and you can see what they're talking about here. So the unclear version of that question doesn't give you specific social media sites, and it also assumes that the harm exists, right? It's making an assumption right in the question itself. The second version avoids that, right? It gives specificity, and it also talks about a specific potential harm that could be caused. The first version could be any kind of harm we might imagine related to the internet. The second one talks specifically about personal information and privacy. So I will let you go through and read these other examples on your own. If you would like, I'll include a link to the Google Slides that I'm using in the comments on the YouTube video. Or else you could just simply do a quick Google search for research questions or type in writingcenter.gmu.edu and you would be able to find it that way. So overall, as you start to think about the topic for your researched argumentative essay and what position you're going to take on it, I want to encourage you to challenge your own preconceived notions, craft an open-ended research question, and you might be surprised by how your views and beliefs change throughout the process of a really effective research process. So if you have any questions, as usual, let me know, and otherwise, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.